Good evening. This is Amanda Spake. Tonight, we're talking with Roger Burbach, who works for the Center for the Study of the Americas in Berkeley. Roger has had the opportunity to look at both the documents that the State Department released several months ago to support their contention that communist arms were coming into El Salvador. He's also had an opportunity to read the State Department's white paper that was used to support military intervention in the form of military advisors and more military aid to El Salvador. Roger, could you describe those documents and what you saw there?
Well, the documents which the State Department released simultaneously with the white paper are supposed to support their contention that there is overt communist influence, communist involvement in the Salvadorian Revolution, that the Salvadorians, in fact, in their offensive, which occurred in January against the ruling junta of that country, that the Salvadorians received almost all their armed support from communist countries, from Cuba, they claimed, from the Soviet Union, from Vietnam, and that much of this was channeled through Cuba, through Nicaragua. This is the contention, the basic contention of the State Department in their white paper.
Now, you don't believe that?
Well, the interesting thing is these documents which were released really, in many ways, don't support their contention, their central contention that it's a communist support. There are many problems with the documents. One of the key documents, which is an alleged trip by the head of the Salvadorian Communist Party, Handel, to the Soviet Union. In that document, it says flat out that Handel was refused the request from arms by the Soviet Union. He went there asking for arms, asking for some type of assistance, and the Soviet Union said no. Then Handel asked them to help them transport arms that they had gained from other countries, some support. And the Soviet Union there also dragged its feet or gave an outright refusal. The only request which Handel got from the Soviet Union, which was met, was the agreement by the Soviet Union that they would train 30 Salvadorians. Now, the type of training which was involved is unclear to this date. So that is just one example, one major document, and it simply does not support the contention that the Soviet Union was involved in any way in the offensive or in support, providing significant armed support to the Salvadorian revolutionary forces.
It's interesting that you mentioned that. A couple of weeks ago, I had an opportunity to interview a man by the name of Ruben Zamora, who is one of the spokespeople for the Democratic Revolutionary Front of El Salvador, and he spoke a bit about the documents. He said one of them that was also an interesting one alleged that they were getting something like 200,000 uniforms from Czechoslovakia, which he found amusing because, first of all, how would the Czechoslovakians know how to send these uniforms in the first place, and also that there aren't 200,000 rebels that need uniforms. Are you familiar with that document?
Yes, there's some documents which claim that they're providing types of uniforms. I think what is interesting about that point, which aside from what Ruben Zamora pointed out, that the quantities which are involved are pretty incredible. But even that, the only type of assistance which did come from some of the Eastern European countries, it was primarily what they claimed, at least, was uniforms and medical assistance, some types of drugs they promised to give it sometimes, and up to backpacks. I mean, very simple things which these documents claim. Now, whether or not these were delivered, first of all, is a question, and secondly, are these authentic? As you're pointing out, as Ruben Zamora points out, what would you do with 200,000 uniforms in El Salvador?
200,000 Czechoslovakian uniforms, I would
exactly.
add. Tell me, when you say there's some question as to whether these items ever arrived, why do you question that?
Well, primarily because there is one document which indicates where they claim the revolutionary forces claim in one of the documents that some of the assistance which was promised, some of that type of assistance simply was not arriving. Recently, I think a major issue which has come up recently, which is very interesting, is the Wall Street Journal ran an article within the past 2 weeks on the white paper and on the documents. This was the first time where the established press, the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times, Washington Post, any press really took a serious look at these documents that came out with the white paper. And it's amazing. The Wall Street Journal, of course, which we recognize is completely in tow as far as its general support of administration policy, came away from an analysis of those documents saying that they were absolutely provided no support for the white paper and left a great deal of questions open-ended.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Wall Street Journal article did raise the issue that many of the figures in the documents were extrapolated, and that tended to detract from the credibility of the white paper. What do you think about that?
Well, yes, there's one key point, one document C, I believe, which they dispute in the Wall Street Journal. In there, it's claimed this is the only document which supports what the charge which is made in the white paper, which says there's 200,000 tons promised of arms and equipment which should go to El Salvador. This is the only place in all the white papers, in all the documents supporting the white papers, where any figures is mentioned. Now, this is the key figure which the State Department used, and they claimed that they extrapolated. They simply said, well, we'll multiply this 200 tons times 4. Now, where they picked the figure from 4, according to the Wall Street Journal, is an open question. And they multiplied it by 4, and they got 800 tons, and they said this is what the communist nations promised, 800 tons. Now, it's interesting, when the Wall Street Journal went to the State Department, and one of the main figures involved in that, John Glassman, and asked him about the figure of 4, and he simply said, well, we didn't get that from the documents. We got that from our own intelligence. In other words, they just left it where they can't back up anything with the documents. They say now it's simply relying on their own intelligence, and there's no documentary support offered for that whatsoever.
Okay, you've mentioned John Glassman. Now, John Glassman was the person in the State Department that, as my understanding, found these documents. It's interesting. I had an opportunity to talk to former ambassador to El Salvador, Robert White, yesterday. And White said that he described the conditions under which Glassman found these documents. I think we should hear from him, and then maybe we can come back to you and comment a little bit more about what White has to say. So this is Robert White. He was the former ambassador to El Salvador, recently resigned. He was ousted by the Reagan administration, but he was in El Salvador when these documents were found. So let's go to Robert White now. Could you describe how the documents were obtained? There seems to be some differences of opinion about where they came from, at least as I read the Wall Street Journal articles.
As I understand it, as it was represented to me, this Foreign Service officer, John Glassman, went to the police station and found these documents in a box that was, in effect, like a file for which they had no particular use. In other words, the implication being that the police didn't know what they had, and Glassman found these documents, which indeed proved to be very, to give us a lot of insights into what was going on.
Well, there seems to be some debate about, I believe, document C, which is the one that was supposedly written by a member of the El Salvadorian Communist Party, but there are several different handwriting specimens on it or something like that. Are you familiar with that?
Oh, yes. But look, I have read probably everything there is to read about the documents, including the documents themselves, and including, of course, the white paper. And what I think the conclusion that you have to come to is, why would anyone fabricate such weak and unconvincing documents? The documents themselves prove very, very little.
Right.
The real problem that the American people should have with those who guide our foreign policy is where does this administration get the right to issue a white paper which claims all kinds of proof for, quote, communist interference, unquote, when that proof does not exist in the documents that they cite. In other words, it's just a sloppy, badly done, unscholarly, unobjective work, and that's the real criticism.
I see.
Not the concern should not be for the documents, which are almost surely genuine. The concern should be for the white paper.
I see. I'm wondering, now that you're out of the hot spot, as it were. You are a former ambassador. Looking back on your experiences now, what do you think is going to be a possible solution in El Salvador that will meet the needs of the people there?
Well, I think if this administration sticks by its chosen course of action, which is to provide military assistance and military advisors to the military of El Salvador, and point that military towards a violent solution of the country's problems, then I think you're going to see a long, drawn-out civil war, and the center parties and people will gradually disappear, and two extremes will become more and more powerful. And my guess is that eventually the left will win because they enjoy more popular support than the other side. Certainly they enjoy more popular support than the far right, which has no popular support at all to speak of. So I think that if this administration sticks to its position of being against a negotiated peace, then I see a long and bloody war.
That was Robert White. Now, Roger, do you basically agree or disagree with what he said about the documents?
Yes, I mean, I think he finally is hitting the nail on the head. It's the first I think it's the first statement I've heard that he's made where he's really come clean and said the same thing, which is that the documents are very flimsy and they simply do not support the white paper. And the main problem, it turns out, is with the white paper itself and its analysis, which is totally based on the Reagan administration's right-wing perceptions of the cause of all evil in the world, namely the communist countries, and this simply doesn't hold up.
What do you think about what he said about the left in El Salvador having more support or a great deal of popular support? That's something that's been denied by the press here.
Yes, I mean, this is very interesting. The first time I think White has come out and said this. I think he's Johnny come lately, of course, and he's moving away now and trying to explain away his past activities. He also said that in the future the center would disappear and you'd have only two extremes. The center disappeared when Ambassador White was down there in El Salvador acting on behalf of the Carter administration. By then, there was no longer any center. Guillermo Ungo, who was the member of the first junta, it simply represents the center. While Ambassador White was there, joined the Democratic Revolutionary Front. So the center disappeared while he was there, and it clearly is a struggle between the repressive regime, the military at present, and the revolutionary forces, and they do enjoy massive popular support.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any idea how massive that support is, and is it growing?
Well, from recent reports coming up that the guerrilla forces, the popular armies, which have been forming in the different departments outside of San Salvador, have been growing in strength fairly rapidly during the past months. They now talk about popular armies in different provinces composed of several thousand people, and these people are under arms and are committed to the struggle, and many of them come from the very areas where they live. I mean, very areas where they are now fighting. This is a popular army. This is rooted and based among the sectors of the population who do comprise the vast majority of that country.
I'm wondering, in the current debate over the white paper, there is talk that there will be yet another white paper, this time on alleging church involvement in communist forces in El Salvador. Another white paper yet has been talked about on Guatemala, and I believe there will be more and more attempts made to pin arms coming through Nicaragua into the El Salvadorian rebellion. What do you think about all that?
Well, the administration, in view of what's happened with this white paper, and even Ambassador White now coming out against it essentially, and the Wall Street Journal coming out and making a shambles of it, I think that the administration would be wise to consider whether they want to put out any white papers. But the reports I have I've heard also conflicting reports, and one of them, the most reliable I've heard, was that there will be a white paper in Guatemala. Now, it's entirely possible that one of the things they will do in the case of Guatemala is try and say that the church is involved. And it is true, the church is involved. There's no doubt about it, and that reflects the situation in the country, which is that the church itself is becoming, once a revolutionary change to occur within those societies.
Mm-hmm. What is happening in Guatemala that would necessitate a white paper?
There has been a growing demonstrated strength of the guerrilla forces there, the revolutionary forces in throughout the country. The regime of President Lucas, which is now in power, which has been one of the bloodiest in history in terms of the number of people killed. All the regimes for the past 2 dozen years almost have been fairly violent. But under Lucas, President Lucas, that has reached new extremes, primarily because they're trying to repress the growing revolutionary forces throughout the country. And this has reached a crisis proportions. The administration, the Reagan administration, is looking for any pretext to dump military aid into that country and even military advisors, just as it did in El Salvador. And so it's entirely probable or possible that they are at present concocting some new white paper to demonstrate that the Soviet Union, Cuba, Nicaragua, everybody in the supposed communist terrorist world is involved in trying to provide arms to the Guatemalan insurgents, the Guatemalan revolutionaries. And this, of course, is to justify massive U.S. military intervention, no other reason.
So you're suggesting basically that we meaning the United States, want to pour arms into Latin America, is the way I hear you talking.
Well, yes. I mean, this is the interesting thing, which was entirely lost with this white paper came out alleging communist interference, communist arms coming in. And all figures, if you sit down and look at the figures that the administration is saying of arms sales, arms deliveries that are occurring to El Salvador, and if you look at what they even allege, U.S. arms assistance, U.S. arms shipments to El Salvador have many times over duplicated what they claim the communist countries have given. And the U.S. is the major, and from the indications of the Reagan administration, it wants to step that up, the major arms dealer for Latin America, and particularly now for Central America. It is really the United States that is widening, creating the Central American War. It is not the communist countries of the world.
Why do we want a Central American war? I'm struck by that.
I think the U.S. is paying the price for the fact that it's supported repressive military regimes in Central America for well over 2 decades now, and that the people in those countries want drastic changes. They no longer want the U.S. domination. They do not want the U.S. to tell them what to do every step of the way, which has happened continually. They want to get rid of the military dictators, and this is a really a growing situation, a growing region of conflict, because the people are demanding change. And the Reagan administration comes into office at the time when this change, this demand for change, for revolutionary change, is at its highest point, and the U.S. and the Reagan administration, based on its right-wing ideology, is determined to try and stop this through massive arms shipments, and in the process it is widening and creating, in effect, a Central American war.
I think all of us have to wonder and have asked ourselves about the parallels to Vietnam, which is something you mentioned in your article, that there was another white paper that was issued in 1965 before the U.S. put massive military involvement, arms, men into Southeast Asia. How does that relate?
Well, it's to quote someone who said that history is repeating itself. The first time is farce and the second time is tragedy. And that's exactly, or I believe it's the reverse actually, but this is exactly what's happening in Central America. The U.S. In 1965 put out a white paper and their claim that it was North Vietnam which was causing all the problems in South Vietnam, and then went on to dump massive military aid, massive military assistance, and ground troops, U.S. ground troops, into South Vietnam. And there clearly is a parallel. This administration is repeating the past.
Mm-hmm. I think in summation, it's important to talk a little bit about what is going to happen in El Salvador. Former Ambassador White said that he believed a negotiated political settlement was the answer. What do you think?
I think that the basic criteria and what the Salvadorian revolutionary forces and what the Salvadorian people are demanding is self-determination, to shape their own society, to shape their own government. as the revolutionary forces have indicated, the Democratic Revolutionary Front, they are willing to sit down and negotiate, to discuss with any parties that want to come to the table what type of situation, what type of new government will be created in El Salvador. Now, it is true they have certain basic principles which they are going to operate off in those negotiations, demands for fundamental changes in their society. So that is going to be part of the negotiated process. There will, in a sense, there will be a situation develop where eventually I think the U.S. will be forced, just as it was in Vietnam, to go to the negotiating table. It's going to lose the war. It's losing right now.
Okay, thank you, Roger. That was Roger Burbach from the Center for the Study of the Americas. This is Amanda Spake for Voices of Mother Jones.
For information about obtaining copies of this program, please write the Pacifica Program Service, 5316 Venice Boulevard, Los Angeles, California, 90019.